In 1943, a mother in Salford fed a family of 5 on 11 shillings a week. No supermarket, no food bank, no delivery slot. She had a back garden the size of a living room, a packet of seeds, and knowledge that took 3 generations to build and 1 generation to forget. Number 11 on this list was recommended by district nurses to pregnant women across the north of England through the 1950s. Number 8 fed the same family for 3 generations from a single saved seed. And number 1 is the reason your allotment waiting list is now 5 years long. These were not hobbies, they were not weekend projects. They were how working-class Britain fed itself when the wages ran out before the week did. The soil did not care how much you earned. It only cared whether you knew what to plant. Subscribe, because what follows is going to make you want to dig something. Let us count them down. Vegetable 20, beetroot. It stained everything it touched. The chopping board, the hands, the apron. Nobody cared. It was free food. Beetroot grew in almost every working-class back garden from the 1920s onward. It needed nothing but a patch of soil and patience. Boiled, pickled in malt vinegar, and stored in kilner jars, it lasted months on the larder shelf. A penny packet of seed in 1955 produced enough to feed a family all winter. The Ministry of Food, Dig for Victory leaflets from 1941 listed beetroot as one of the 6 essential back garden vegetables. District nurses recommended it to anemic children and pregnant women throughout the 1950s. High in iron and folate, it was doing the work of a supplement before supplements existed. The kitchen turned magenta when beetroot was on the go, the smell of vinegar and earth and something sweet underneath. The jars on the shelf glowing dark red in the afternoon light, like small victories lined up in a row. Modern pre-cooked vacuum-packed beetroot costs £1.80 for 4 small pieces. She grew enough to last until spring for the price of a penny stamp. Vegetable 19, runner beans. Every back fence in Britain had them climbing up it in summer. They cost nothing and fed everyone. Runner beans grew vertically, which made them perfect for tiny back gardens and allotment plots with no spare ground. A packet of seeds cost a penny in 1950 and produced beans from July through October. Sliced and salted, packed into kilner jars, they were preserved for the winter months when fresh vegetables were scarce and expensive. The Royal Horticultural Society allotment records from the 1950s show runner beans as the most commonly grown vegetable in working-class plots across the north of England. School nurses recommended them as a meat substitute for large families who could not afford the butcher every week. High in protein and fiber, they did the job quietly and without complaint. The pods snapped off the vine with a clean crack, the smell of green and summer, the rhythm of slicing at the kitchen table with the radio on. That was July. Every year, without fail. Vegetable 18, kale. Long before it appeared in smoothies and superfood aisles, kale was the vegetable that kept working-class children alive through winter. It grew through frost and snow, the only fresh green available in Britain between November and February in most working-class gardens. No protection needed, no greenhouse, no expertise. Push the seeds in, walk away, and come back when everything else had died. Boiled with a ham bone, shredded into soups, or wilted in a pan with a scrape of dripping. It fed families through the months when the garden offered nothing else. The Women's Institute Kitchen Garden Guide from 1949 listed kale as the single most valuable winter vegetable for the working household. Not one of the most valuable, the most valuable. It contains more iron per gram than beef, more calcium than milk. Working-class children eating kale through winter were better nourished than their middle-class counterparts buying imported produce from the greengrocer. Dark, almost blue-green leaves standing stiff in a frosted garden while everything around them had collapsed. Steam rising from the pot, the smell of something earthy and deeply sustaining. Kale is now sold as a superfood at £3 a bag. It always was. The marketing just took 70 years to catch up. Vegetable 17, potatoes. 1 allotment plot, 1 variety of seed potato. Enough food for an entire year. Potatoes were the foundation of the working-class diet from the 1800s through to the 1970s. A stone of seed potatoes cost 1 shilling in 1950 and produced enough to fill the larder shelf from harvest in August through to the following spring. Boiled, mashed, roasted, chipped, baked, made into cakes and soups. No other vegetable worked harder or stretched further. A family of 4 could eat primarily on homegrown potatoes for 4 months of the year. The Ministry of Food wartime guidance recommended every household with garden space grow potatoes before any other crop. Nothing was wasted. The peelings went into the stock pot. The small ones the shops would not take went into the pan first. The weight of a freshly dug potato, still warm from the soil, the smell of earth and starch, the sound of the first ones hitting the bottom of the metal bucket. She grew a year's supply for the price of 1 shilling. The ground did the rest. Vegetable 16, broad beans. They are one of the oldest cultivated foods in human history. Roman soldiers carried them on campaign. British working-class families grew them because they had no choice, and they were right to. Broad beans are planted in autumn and overwinter in the ground, producing a harvest in May before almost any other vegetable is ready. They filled the hungry gap, that stretch between the end of stored winter food and the start of summer crops when the larder shelf was at its most bare. A penny packet of seed in 1955 produced enough beans to bridge 6 weeks of lean spring eating. Dried and stored, they lasted years. Soaked overnight and added to soups and stews, they stretched meat further than anything else in the garden. The Dig for Victory campaign specifically named broad beans in 1942 as essential for households wanting to eat through the spring gap. The pods are thick and velvet grey on the outside. Open them, and the beans sit lined up like small green jewels inside. The smell of something fresh and quietly extraordinary. Broad beans now appear on restaurant menus, podded and double-peeled at £12 a main course. She grew them to survive February. The Romans carried them across Europe for the same reason. Your great-grandmother grew them without knowing either of those things. The supermarket would rather you forgot all three. Vegetable 15. Leeks. The Welsh called it their national vegetable. The rest of Britain called it dinner. Leeks stand in the ground through hard frost without damage. Harvestable, fresh from October through to March. A row in the back garden meant fresh vegetables on the table every week through the hardest months of the year without spending a penny. A penny packet of leek seed in 1955 produced 30 to 40 plants, enough for a family to eat leeks twice a week all winter. Leek and potato soup, leek and cheese pie, leeks braised with a scrape of dripping, 3 dishes, 1 vegetable, almost zero cost, high in vitamin C and folate, exactly what working-class families needed through the months when fresh food was hardest to find. Pulled from the frozen ground, roots trailing earth, the white and pale green clean against the winter mud, the smell of something mild and sweet filling the kitchen as they cooked slowly down. 3 leeks at the supermarket today cost £1.20. She grew 40 from a penny packet and ate them fresh from the ground all winter. Vegetable 14, parsnips. The first frost made them sweeter. She knew that. She planned around it. Parsnips improved dramatically after the first hard frost. The cold converts starch to sugar, making them sweeter and more nutritious. Working-class gardeners deliberately left them in the ground until after the frost before pulling a single one. A penny packet of seed in 1950 produced a row that lasted from November through February. Roasted alongside the Sunday joint, mashed with butter, made into soups with the potato water left over from the night before. Ministry of Food Dig for Victory leaflet number 7 specifically named parsnips as a crop to leave in the ground through autumn for maximum sweetness. An entire generation of gardeners already knew it. The leaflet simply confirmed what the allotment had taught them. High in vitamin C and folate. The frost did not damage them. It improved them, roasted until the edges turned dark and caramelized. The kitchen filling with something between honey and earth. That smell meant Sunday was doing what Sunday was supposed to do. Pre-prepared parsnip chunks in a supermarket bag cost £1.80 today. She grew a whole winter's worth for a penny and waited for the frost to do its work. She did not fight the weather. She worked with it. There is a whole philosophy in that. Vegetable 13. Onions. No working-class kitchen ran without them. They were the base of everything, and they cost almost nothing to grow. A set of onion sets cost sixpence in 1955 and produced enough to last a family from August through to January. When dried and plaited into ropes, they hung from the kitchen ceiling through autumn and winter. Not decoration, the winter food supply, on display. The base of every soup, every stew, every gravy. Without the onion, the pot had no depth and no warmth. Fried in dripping until soft and golden, they became a meal in themselves, served on toast with a scrape of mustard on a night when there was nothing else. The Women's Institute kitchen garden bulletins from the 1940s listed onions as the single most important crop for the household cook. Not the most productive, the most important. Because nothing else in the garden did what the onion did for flavor. The ropes of dried onions hanging in the kitchen, papery and golden. The sizzle as the first one hit the hot dripping. The smell that meant something good was on its way. A bag of onions cost 79 pence today. She grew enough to last 6 months for the price of a bus fare. Here is the number nobody mentions. By 1943, homegrown vegetables were providing an estimated 10% of Britain's total food supply. Not from farms, from back gardens and allotment plots the size of living rooms. A Ministry of Food internal report from 1944 found that working-class families growing their own food were spending 40% less on groceries than those who did not, 40%, on wages that left almost nothing to begin with. The vegetables on this list were not hobbies, they were survival strategy, and the knowledge of how to grow them passed from neighbor to neighbor across garden fences in a way no government campaign could have engineered or replaced. That knowledge did not disappear on its own. If what you have heard so far is making you see your grandmother's garden differently, hit subscribe. There is more coming, and some of it is going to make you angry. Let us keep going. Vegetable 12. Cabbage. Nobody romanticized cabbage. It was not the kind of vegetable that appeared in paintings or poetry. It was the kind that appeared on the table 3 times a week because it had to. Cabbage grew fast, produced heavily, and could be harvested over a long season. Spring greens in April, summer cabbage in July, Savoy through the winter. One packet of seed cost a halfpenny in 1950 and produced enough plants for a family of 5 to eat cabbage twice a week for 5 months. Boiled with a ham bone, shredded raw into salads, stuffed with leftover mince, and braised in the pot. Every part of the plant was eaten. The outer leaves most people discard today went straight into the stock pot. The National Allotment Society records confirm cabbage as the second most grown vegetable in British plots after potatoes through the 1950s. Rich in vitamin C, it was critical in post-war Britain when citrus fruit was still expensive and largely unavailable outside cities. The heavy outer leaves peeled away, the pale heart revealed underneath, the smell of it boiling on the range, not elegant but honest. The steam rising and the windows running with condensation. A whole cabbage costs 69 pence today and is considered dull. She considered it essential. She was right. Vegetable 11. Peas. Children ate them straight off the vine before they ever reached the kitchen. The ones that made it inside were the lucky ones. Garden peas were one of the few vegetables children would eat without complaint. Sweet, tender, eaten raw or cooked. A penny packet of seed in 1955 produced enough to eat fresh through June and July. The surplus was podded and dried, stored in paper bags on the larder shelf, and used through winter in soups and stews. The pods themselves went into the stock pot. Nothing from the pea plant was wasted, not a scrap. The Women's Institute Kitchen Garden Guide from 1949 noted that peas were the first vegetable parents used to introduce children to growing. Children who grew their own ate more vegetables. The WI knew this in 1949. It took the rest of the country 60 years to run a study confirming it. The pop of a pod split open with a thumbnail, the small green spheres rattling into the bowl, sweet and cold and eaten before they reached the kitchen more often than not. Frozen peas cost £1 a bag. Fresh peas cost £3 for a small punnet in season. She grew them for a penny, and her children ate them off the vine. Vegetable 10. Carrot. The wartime government told the nation that carrots could help you see in the blackout. That was propaganda. What was true was that carrots grew in almost any soil and cost virtually nothing to produce. A penny packet of seed in 1950 produced enough carrots to eat fresh from July through October and store through to January. Kept in a box of sand in the shed or cellar, they lasted months without any effort at all. Raw, boiled, roasted, grated into salads, used in cakes as a sugar substitute during rationing. No other vegetable in the working-class garden was more versatile. The claim about carrots improving night vision was invented by the Air Ministry to explain why RAF pilots were shooting down Luftwaffe planes in the dark. The real reason was radar. The carrot story stuck, and quietly, underneath the propaganda, the nutritional truth was real. Beta-carotene does support eye health. She did not know the science. She just knew carrots kept pulled from the ground with a twist. The smell of soil and something sweet, the bright orange against the dark earth. A bag of carrots costs 49 pence today. She grew a 6-month supply for a penny. The government lied about why carrots mattered. They mattered anyway. Vegetable 9. Turnips. Before the potato arrived in Britain, the turnip fed the working poor through winter. By the 1950s, most people had forgotten that. The allotment men had not. Turnips grew fast, from seed to harvest in 8 weeks, and could be sown in succession to provide food through summer, autumn, and into winter. A halfpenny packet of seed in 1955 produced enough to feed a family through 2 full months. Mashed with butter and pepper, added to stews and broths, sliced thin and roasted alongside the Sunday joint. And the tops, the green leaves, were eaten as spring greens in March and April. 2 crops from 1 plant. Nothing extra spent. Before the potato displaced it, the turnip was the primary winter food of the British working class for 300 years. The allotment men who kept growing it through the 1950s were preserving something older than anyone around them remembered. The Museum of English Rural Life Oral Histories described turnip cultivation as near universal in northern working-class allotments through the 1960s. She was not preserving culinary heritage. She was feeding her family on a budget that allowed for nothing to go untried. Heavy and pale purple-white, the smell when cut, sharp and earthy and slightly sweet. Mashed until smooth, it turned golden with butter and disappeared before the plates were cold. The restaurants call it rhubarb now and charge £8 a portion. The allotment men were right all along. Vegetable 8, tomatoes, a south-facing wall, a jam jar of water, and a seed saved from last year's best fruit. That was all it took. Working-class families grew tomatoes against south-facing walls and in old tin baths. No greenhouse needed. Seeds were saved from the finest fruit each year, dried on the kitchen windowsill through winter, and planted again in spring. The same variety grown in the same garden for decades. A south-facing wall absorbed heat through the day and radiated it back at night, extending the growing season by 3 to 4 weeks in northern England. The surplus was bottled in Kilner jars with a pinch of salt, preserved tomato sauce that lasted through winter on the larder shelf. Women's Institute preservation guides from 1950 listed home-bottled tomatoes as an essential store cupboard item, not a nice-to-have, essential. After the first year, the cost of growing was effectively zero. The seed was saved. The wall was already there. The tin bath had already done its first job. Warm from the wall on a September afternoon, the skin split slightly and fragrant, the smell of tomato plant, green and sharp and unmistakable. Eaten over the sink because they were too ripe to carry inside without losing them. The same family tomato, 3 generations, 1 saved seed. That is not gardening, that is inheritance. Vegetable 7, rhubarb, plant it once. Eat it for 20 years. No vegetable asked less of you and gave back more. Rhubarb planted once in a corner of the garden came back every spring for decades without attention. Forced rhubarb, covered with a bucket or a terracotta forcer in January, produced tender pink stalks in February when nothing else in the garden was stirring. Stewed with a spoonful of sugar, it made a pudding from almost nothing. Bottled with ginger, it kept all year. Made into wine, it became a small winter luxury that cost the price of sugar and an afternoon. A crown of rhubarb cost 6pence in 1948, 1 purchase. Decades of free food. The Yorkshire rhubarb triangle supplied forced rhubarb to households across the north from January through March, the only fresh fruit available in Britain in the depths of winter. The leaves were boiled and sprayed on roses to kill aphids. Every part had a purpose. The pink stalks pulled in February, still pale from forcing, the sound of them snapping, stewed down into something jammy and sharp, the kitchen smelling of sugar and the promise of spring arriving early. 6pence in 1948. 20 years of pudding. No other investment in the garden came close. Here is the part that should make you angry. Between 1960 and 1980, the number of households growing their own food fell by 60%. The supermarkets did not force anyone to stop. They simply made growing feel unnecessary. Loss leader pricing on vegetables through the 1970s made shop-bought produce cheaper per item than seed and compost. The National Allotment Society reported a 45% decline in active plots between 1968 and 1982. Waiting lists that had been weeks long emptied out. Plots were abandoned. The knowledge went with the people who held it. A bag of 6 tomatoes now costs £1.80. The allotment waiting list in most British cities is 5 years long. They won, for a while. The waiting list tells a different story now. If you have not subscribed yet, now would be a good time. If you have not subscribed yet, now would be a good time. And drop in the comments which vegetable surprises you most. We are not done yet. Vegetable 6, spinach Popeye made it famous in 1929. Working-class allotment growers had been relying on it for 200 years before that. Spinach grew fast, could be sown 3 times a year, and produced food within 6 weeks of planting. A penny packet of seed in 1955 produced enough for a family to eat twice a week through spring and autumn. Wilted in the pan with a scrape of dripping, added to soups and pies, or eaten raw by children who were told it would make them strong. It would. District nurses in working-class areas recommended spinach specifically to pregnant women and young children through the 1950s. The Popeye cartoons were commissioned by the American spinach industry in 1929 to boost consumption during the Great Depression. The strategy worked on both sides of the Atlantic, but she did not need a cartoon sailor to tell her spinach was valuable. She had been growing it since her mother showed her how. A mountain of raw leaves reduced to almost nothing in the pan. Dark green, glossy with dripping, smelling of iron and earth. A bag of baby spinach spinach costs £1.50 today and wilts in 3 days. She grew it herself, cut what she needed, and the plant kept producing all season. Vegetable 5. Garlic. Most British cookbooks before 1960 did not mention it. Working-class families in the north grew it anyway. Garlic had been grown in British cottage gardens for centuries before it became fashionable in the 1970s. Planted in October, it looked after itself through winter and was ready to harvest the following July. It required nothing in between. One bulb planted in autumn produced 10 to 12 new bulbs the following summer. One purchase, 10 times the return. The same garlic replanted year after year at no further cost. District nurses in the 1940s and 50s recommended raw garlic for chest complaints and winter infections. Before antibiotics were widely available in working-class communities, it was one of very few effective options. The Women's Institute Herbal Remedy Guides from the 1930s listed it as a primary remedy for winter illness. The fashion for French cooking in the 1960s made garlic suddenly desirable to the middle classes. It had been growing in British soil for hundreds of years. The trend simply made the people who had never needed it notice it for the first time. A bulb of garlic costs 40 pence today. She planted one and harvested 12. The working-class garden was always ahead of the trend. It just never got the credit. Vegetable 4. Jerusalem artichokes. Plant them once and spend the next decade trying to get rid of them. In a working-class garden, that was considered a feature. Jerusalem artichokes spread aggressively once planted, returning every year from any tuber left in the ground. For a family trying to feed themselves through winter, this was not a nuisance. It was a permanent food supply that required no further investment of money or effort. Roasted, mashed, made into soup. The taste something between a nutty potato and something with more depth and character than either. A bag of tubers cost 6pence in 1950 and never needed replanting. The same clump fed the same family for a generation. The Museum of English Rural Life Oral Histories described Jerusalem artichokes as the poverty gardener's friend, almost impossible to kill, productive through cold winters, and ignored by the pests that destroyed other crops. High in inulin, a prebiotic fiber that feeds gut bacteria. The Victorian medical press recommended them for digestive health long before the word probiotic existed. She was ahead of the wellness industry by about a century. Knobbly and strange, difficult to peel, smelling of something between potato and mushroom. Roasted until the skin blistered and the inside turned creamy and rich. Jerusalem artichokes appear on restaurant menus now at £9 a starter. She could not have stopped them growing if she had tried. Vegetable 3. Marrow. It grew so fast you could almost watch it. By August, it was the size of a small child. By September, it had fed the family for a month. Marrows were the most productive vegetable in the working-class garden. One plant could produce 6 to 8 fruits in a single season. A penny packet of seed in 1955. One seed, one plant. Enough marrow to last from August through October. Stuffed with mince and breadcrumbs and baked, sliced and fried in dripping, boiled and mashed with butter, made into jam when nothing else was left. The flesh absorbed whatever it was cooked with, which made it the perfect extender for any dish that needed to go further than it should. Stored whole in a cool shed, a marrow lasted 2 to 3 months without any preservation. It was its own packaging, dark green and enormous, sitting on the kitchen table like something that had made a decision to be there. The smell of it cooking, mild and slightly sweet, taking on whatever surrounded it. Allotment competitions across the north awarded prizes for the largest marrow through the 1950s and 60s. The competitive spirit kept the tradition alive long after it might otherwise have faded. The supermarket took the marrow, harvested it smaller, called it a courgette, and charged twice as much per gram. She grew the whole thing for a penny. Vegetable 2. Nettles. It was not grown, it was gathered, and it was free, nutritious, and available to anyone who knew what they were looking at. Young nettle tops gathered in March and April before they flower, the stinging hairs neutralized completely by heat. One of the first fresh greens available after a long winter. Boiled with a potato and an onion, seasoned with salt and pepper. A bowl of nettle soup cost nothing beyond the fuel to cook it. The Ministry of Food published nettle soup recipes in 1941 as part of the wartime food campaign. Nettles were free, abundant, and nutritionally exceptional, higher in iron than spinach, higher in protein than most garden vegetables, rich in vitamins A and C. The most nutritious free food in Britain grows wild in every hedgerow and back lane in the country. It always has. She knew that. We forgot it. Gathered with bare hands if you were brave, or with old gloves if you were sensible. The sting gone the moment the water boiled. The soup deep green, almost silky, smelling of spring and something ancient and right. The nettles still grow for free in the lane behind your house. They have not moved. Only the knowledge of what to do with them has. Vegetable 1. the allotment itself. It was not just a plot of land, it was the difference between eating and not eating, between dignity and dependence, between a family that managed and one that did not. The British allotment movement was formalized by the Allotments Act of 1908, guaranteeing working-class families access to land to grow their own food. At its peak in 1943, there were 1.4 million allotment plots in Britain, 1 in 10 households growing a significant portion of what they ate. The allotment was where working-class men went on Saturday mornings, where knowledge was exchanged, seeds were shared, and the community maintained itself quietly and practically across rows of leeks and beans and parsnips standing in the frost. The waiting list for a local allotment in 1955 was typically a few weeks. In most British cities today, it is 5 to 7 years. The 19 vegetables on this list were grown on those plots by ordinary people with ordinary tools on a patch of ground the size of a living room. The smell of turned earth on a Saturday morning, a thermos of tea on the shed windowsill, the sound of a spade going in, the quiet of someone working on something that genuinely mattered. Those plots fed this country through its hardest decades. The men and women who worked them did not call it self-sufficiency. They called it Saturday. Pass it on. Try one this week. Even a pot on the windowsill. Kale in a window box. Peas in a trough by the back door. One seed, one attempt. I planted a row of runner beans along my back fence last spring. My grandfather grew them in the same spot. The beans tasted exactly as I remember them tasting at his kitchen table 30 years ago. That is not coincidence. That is soil memory. Tell me in the comments what your family grew, what was in your nan's garden, what your grandfather's allotment smelled like on a Saturday morning. That knowledge is still out there. Write it down before it disappears. She knew what to plant. She knew when. Now you do too.